Okay, my name is Bill Dillon, William J. Dillon, and was on the USS Sailfish during World War II. And I'm on an airplane flying back to London, and I had on my USS Sailfish jacket and my hat. And we're landing, and here's a young fellow sitting across the aisle from me, comes over as we're deboarding, and asks me if I know George Rotek. You could have knocked me over with a feather. Do I know George Rotek? Well, certainly I know George Rotek. He was the only survivor off of the aircraft carrier, the Shu, that we sunk in December the 4th, 1944. And he and I had met, and we met at our reunion. But anyway, how can you imagine that meeting Steve Moore in that kind of a situation? Now, my daughter, Linda, saw the significance of that, and Steve started walking away, and my daughter ran after him, and then got his email address and his telephone, and by God, this is how we got together, and here we are today. Isn't that a story, huh? In order to be qualified on a submarine, it takes a very long time. It's not, you don't work aboard a submarine and you're already qualified. What you have to do on that particular sub, you have to start learning exactly everything about the boat. You have to know how much fuel you take on board. You have to know how much water to take on board. You have to know between the difference between the inner hull and the outer hull. You had to know where the bilges were. You had to know how to start an engine. You had to know how to fire a 20 millimeter or 40 millimeter gun. You had to do all of that, and then you had to take a test. And even when you're at sea during the war, we were taking tests even during the war, and it would probably take you close to a year before you really understood the boat that you're on. Take the test, and then you get qualified, and then you get the dolphins. For enlisted man, it's the gray dolphins, and for an officer, it was gold. Okay, but you had to know how to do everything in the boat. The thing about that, I learned all that, but nobody could learn my job. Nobody knew how to get on that internet, get on that communication and record the codes that came in, and then hand them to the decoder until we could get the message from Pearl Harbor, what we're supposed to be doing and what we were doing. So there's a big difference to learn how to. It's still true today. You have to do the same thing today. And it takes them. I think it takes them longer now because you're in a nuclear boat now, and you have to learn a lot about the nuclears in order to get that job. But during World War II, it was a very tough job to be qualified in submarines. The Sailfish was the very first submarine to sink an aircraft carrier. And the funny thing how that happened was I was on the radio, and of course recording the encoding that was coming in. And so we had an encoding from Pearl Harbor that they were able to break down the Japanese communications, and they advised us that there was a task force heading back toward Japan, and they told us the size of it. And so we were trying to get ahead of it, and we did. We got ahead of it for about 3 days and had to wait until they showed up. And then we really weren't sure they were going to show up because of the weather. Normally, when we make an approach on any kind of a target, we usually use the periscopes, but we have an attack periscope and we have a search periscope, but we couldn't use it because of the weather. So we didn't know what was out there in any way, shape, or form. So I'm on the radar, and all I could do is tell the skipper that, hey, there's a couple of big blips here, and that looks like we got something that's pretty good. So anyway, for the first time in the history of submarine warfare, we used the radar to make an approach on something we had never seen at all. It was midnight with the heavy rains, and so we fired 4 torpedoes, and we got 2 hits, but we didn't know what we hit. And so we continued to submerge and reload and go back at it. And so for 12 hours, roughly 12 hours, we fired torpedoes at the Chuyu, and we didn't see it until the next morning, somewhere around about 9 o'clock. For the first time, we saw the ship listing on its side. And the funny thing about that, later on, the 21 survivors of the our sister submarine was on it. We didn't know until the war was over. They told me everything. He told me everything that they were doing to get off the ship, and I was telling him everything we were doing to sink the ship. So for the first time in the history of warfare, a submarine by ourselves during a raging typhoon sunk the Chuyu. We were staying at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. What we normally do, anytime you make a war patrol, they would bring us on back, and they put us 2 weeks in the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. So we were staying at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, and I walked out on the front veranda, the front patio, and Admiral Nimitz and his wife were there. And here I am, just a second-class radioman, and his wife said, "Do you want to take a picture with the Admiral?" Geez, you could have knocked me over with a feather, because here's a guy with a 5-star heading up the entire Pacific warfare, and here's a little guy who's only a second-class radioman, is 19 years old, and certainly I said, "Oh man, yes I do." So anyway, I was shaking like a leaf, but because here I'm enlisted guy, here's a 5-star Admiral, and I'm standing in front of him, and I was hoping I was going to take a good picture, and I did. Okay, that's how I got a picture of me and Admiral Nimitz in front of the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, and then his wife just shook the hand, and that was the end of that. So I'm the very last living Sailfish survivor that has combat ribbons off of the USS Sailfish. There's nobody else around except me. So if you want to know you have any questions you want to ask him, you better ask him now. Okay. I served on the patrols 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and on 4 of those we had combat medals for each one. However, on patrol number 9, we failed to get a combat ribbon for that because we didn't sink any ships, so we didn't find anything of any interest whatsoever. So we took 16 fish out, and we brought 16 fish back, and so that was we just spent 2 months there and really did nothing. When we had some repair work done in Pearl Harbor, and normally we'd come out and do a first dive to trim the boat. But before we did that, after we took on all the torpedoes and everything else, we have what we call a diving officer. And what the diving officer was supposed to do, he was supposed to compute all the fuel and all the torpedoes and where we put the waste were or whatever. And he was supposed to take care of how much water you put in the tanks and to trim the boat. And then when you take your first dive, what you do is you do your further trimming. But what happened was the diving officer failed to do any of the computations that he should have done, like an aircraft, like a pilot would do before he takes off. He has a checklist, but he failed to do that. And when the first dive we took, we went down like a rock. We went straight down, and we took probably a 20 to 25 degree angle in the submarine. That's death. Okay, you just can't. It's hard to recover from something like that. So we went straight down, and everybody was trying to get control of the boat. But luckily, when one of the enlisted guys saw what was happening, and without any orders from any officer, luckily he blew the tanks, and we were high emergency reverse, and the screws were sticking out of the water, and we had to wait until the vehicle submerged somewhat to gain control, and in emergency reverse. And then when we came back up, we came straight up and slammed down on the water, and we thought the Sailfish was going to break in half. And that's a fact. Boy, when it hit, oh, Jesus God, was that something. I mean, when it slammed down, oh man, it was, we were blessing ourselves and saying goodbye because we thought we were going to go to Davy's Locker. And you know where that is. That's at the bottom. We stayed on the surface and we picked up 11 pilots and crewmen that get either shut down or ran out of fuel. And we came back the next day and picked up another one, which we saved about a total of 12. But out of that, there was one particular guy in which Ray Bunt jumped off of the forward planes of a submarine in a in a aircraft that got shut down, and it was sinking. But Ray, who was a master diver, jumped off and swam over and rescued that guy, brought him back aboard the forward planes, and then we brought him on board. And they have published me as being the oldest living submariner qualified in submarines, and it will be 80 years beginning in January of 2023. So as of right now, I am 75 years qualified in submarines, the oldest living survivor of any submarine organization, period. I tell everybody, first is a good wife. Number one, a good wife. And the second part of that is a little bourbon. Not to excess, but a little bourbon goes a long way. When it comes to what you do after you get out of the service, I went back to high school and eventually I got in a space program. And I am probably the oldest submariner that actually joined the Space Force and is part of the history of the Space Force. And I was in the blockhouse with General Medeiros, Dr. Werner von Braun, Dr. Debus, Dr. Gruner, Ray Clark, Henry Paul, all of those people that launched the very first satellite we put into space. And I was the manager of all the downrange stations that did all the tracking of the satellites, and we were very successful. But along with that, we were given 90 days to launch the vehicle, where they had given the Navy the first choice, but the Polaris blew up at the launch pad, and so we were given 90 days to launch it with JPL out of California. And we made that within the 90 days and made a totally successful launch and had the very first satellite put into space. And I was the manager of the downrange stations to do that.
And you're a kid that didn't finish his high school degree before he went off to war. Can you talk about coming back home and getting an education?
Yeah. When I entered the service in April 1942, I was a high school football player. We were undefeated that year, 1941, and I quit high school and went into service. And I spent 5.5 years in the service. I got married in January of 1946, and I had, while it's in the service, I had two children. And when I got out of the service, but when I got out of the service, I was still I had no high school education. Went back to high school, and I got my GED. And the day I got my GED, I signed up for college and graduated with electrical engineering degree from the University of Florida in 1951. And then I went on and got my master's degree in systems management. And then I went to UCLA and got most of my courses for a PhD. But 7 kids by that time got in the way, and so I couldn't finish it. But I went, here I am getting out of the service with no education whatsoever, and then entering the space program, and we were very successful at it. And not only that, later on, I did the ground system for the GPS From January of 1970 till September of 1970, working 90 hours a week, and I headed up 21 engineers that developed the GPS for David Packard, who was Assistant Secretary of the Defense. That's a bit. That's a lot. You know, you think about it. Anybody would be proud to have that, to have the luckiness that I've had, and everything I did for some reason or other turned out to be successful. And I think the career I had was unbelievable. And I'm more proud of what I did after the war than what I did in the war.
How would you say going through the Great Depression shaped you and your work ethic later?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Since I was born in 1924, and the Great Depression didn't start till 1929, and then the Depression ran from 29 really until the war started in 1941, and the Great Depression was 1,000 times worse than this 2-year pandemic that we went through. And what we learned during the Depression was we learned discipline. We wasted nothing. And when anything on your plate, you ate it, okay? And what it really taught me was that whenever you want to do something, do it to the best of your ability and get on with it, okay? I've already told people just exactly what you've asked me, okay? And I told them, when you pick this book up, you will not put it down. You're going to find it so interesting. And Steve has written the book so well that the people that he describes on that boat are actually, you are there with them. You're a part of them. In other words, he's taken you aboard that submarine, and you're there. And that's a fact. I really mean that, okay? And so what I tell the youngster boy, just read this book, learn a lot from it, get the discipline behind you, and get an education and follow it through, and be truthful about your entire life. But anything, I will say, anything that Steve has written, seriously, he has taken you there and made you a part of it. So read the book. And that's a fact, Steve. And that's no joke, okay? I mean that. And I'm not just telling you that. I've told other people. Because